Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is David Weinstein. He is a former chief of staff at the Near Foundation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart. Great to be here. Excited for
Yeah.
this.
We've been mutuals on Twitter for a long time. I am curious about Near Protocol. I'd love to go into what exactly it is. I think I did one episode many years ago about it, and it keeps on popping up. So we can talk about that, but we also want to talk about Wisdom School, what it is, why it's important, and particularly related to AI, probably. What do you want to talk about first?
No, super cool. Excited to talk about all of that. I'm happy we can start with Near. I recently just resigned from the Near Foundation about, yeah, at this point, 6 weeks ago or so. So happy to talk about that. And then, yeah, would love to just explore what might come next. I'm still in super exploration mode. Um, and maybe it could be fun just to jam on some of those ideas, what I'm thinking about, what you're thinking about.
Great.
Um, and then we can kind of see where that goes.
Cool. So what is the Near Protocol?
Yeah. Yeah, so near the Near protocol, it's a layer one blockchain. It launched in 2020. So yeah, just 3.5, 4 years ago at this point. It was built in many ways to kind of scale lot of the challenges that we had seen with other protocols, such as Ethereum and other layer ones. And so the founders of the protocol, Ilya and Alex, basically looked at all of the different protocols to date and kind of dove deep into all of them, understanding the pros, the cons, the strengths, the weaknesses, and really kind of built a protocol that kind of took the best pieces from all of them and kind of helped really kind of solve a lot of the problems that were underlying a lot of the technology at the time. Anyway, and so Near launched in 2020. It's been growing ever since. It's one of the bigger protocols to date in terms of things like market cap. It's a top 20 protocol. And yeah, it's a way to kind of scale and also one of the newer things about Near is it's attempting to kind of unify a lot of the layer ones and the different protocols together, kind of
Mm.
abstracting away a lot of the complexity of the chains into a more unified user experience that ideally the end user that's using these applications built on these protocols won't even really know they're using crypto technology. Just like how when you're using an app on a phone or on your computer, you don't really know if it's Google Cloud or if it's
Mhm.
Amazon Web Services, or you don't really know the piping of it. You just know the experience that you want. And so Near is really trying to build, a blockchain protocol infrastructure suite that allows developers to build as easily as possible and the users to use as simply as possible.
Very cool. Does it have a relationship to AI at all? I had heard a few months ago that AI somehow plays a role in Near. I can't remember what I was reading. Is that ring a bell, or is that something I
No,
misremember?
yeah. So Ilya, one of the founders of the protocol, in particular, he actually was at Google prior to launching Near. And he actually was one of the co-authors on this now kind of famous paper called "Attention is All You Need,"
Oh, that's right.
which was sort of kind of researching sort of the transformer model that is kind of at the roots of a lot of the language models today. So Ilya has that background in machine learning and AI. He left Google soon after that, um, and actually was building an open source AI training business called Near AI, which is sort of the beginning
Oh,
of what
that's
Near
interesting.
was. This is like 2018, 2019, I believe. And as part of this, so what it was basically was training data sets. So basically, his understanding at the time was that the most important thing
Yeah.
for this AI feature, so to speak, is going to be high quality data, like making sure data is as high quality as possible. Which I think we all understand why that makes sense. And so he was building a business around training data sets, basically. And he wanted to facilitate micropayments to people all over the world to kind of train and build new and more increasingly complex data sets. and he was looking at crypto solutions to do micropayments and realized that the solutions at the time, essentially Bitcoin and Ethereum, but the other ones as well, just didn't actually work for micropayments in any kind of economically efficient way.
Mm,
Which is why he then built the Near protocol to facilitate micropayments for his Near AI company. The protocol itself then became what it became, and we shifted um, mostly towards that as the main focus for him and the team. But yeah, so he has the AI background. The trading data sets and high quality data is a huge interest of his, as is open source AI in general. So there are a lot of parallels, and
yeah.
more is coming out. I think actually, so today is March 18th. I think I do believe Ilya is actually speaking on an NVIDIA panel, maybe
Uh,
today,
uh.
actually, with the other authors of the Attention is All You Need paper. So announcements coming soon, exciting things coming soon. I do think the intersection of AI and crypto, broadly speaking, is going to be super relevant and important for what comes next.
Very cool. Okay, that's really interesting. I love the pivot story from building. It's just such a good story to build something for you to use for the AI training. Turns out crypto didn't have it. That's great. It's a great like mystery novel basically of reality. Um,
Oh yeah,
and
exactly.
so okay, so AI. So based on your experience, we'll shift to, and this will actually shift right into kind of a wisdom school. What is the relationship between AI and crypto? Is that vision for the Near protocol like hitting it? Is or are we in the era where AI and crypto will meet, or is that still 5 years away?
Yeah, a few questions there. Maybe zooming out, just AI and crypto. And a lot of this is just my like musings. It's not
Yep.
necessarily true. But what I think, so I think AI, as we all know, I mean, we've seen ChatGPT, we've seen the newer models coming out basically every day or every week at this point. Whether it's just the language models directly, like text to text, or it's text to image or text to video, whatever the case may be, like that's extremely powerful. We're seeing an infinite amount of amazing use cases daily, basically. So that's definitely a thing. I think there are some concerns, obviously, and people have various levels of concern about all of this. But some of the to generalize some of the concerns, basically, it's this is a massive amount of power. Should that power be held within a closed or a private
Yes.
institution,
Yeah.
government, company, an individual themselves, whatever that may be? So that's just like a broad suite of concerns. Like, should this much power be within a closed organization?
Yep.
Um, I tend to think no, and we can definitely explore sort of why I think just open matters. That's one thing. And then the other thing I would say is these models are trained obviously on billions and billions of data points. Uh, but how do we ensure that the data that goes in is actually high quality or trusted or true or whatever it may be? So data integrity, data quality, data provenance is going to be super important. And then that then also leads to questions around who determines what data is good? Who
Mhm.
determines what data is true? How do we think about quality and truth and those types of things? That's also an area I think just crypto, again, broadly speaking,
Uh,
can
uh,
play a huge role. So that's the AI side. Yeah, and I guess just to simplify this point, crypto kind of I think acts as a check, so to speak, against the power of AI. And so I
yeah.
think the connection is just critical for this power to be deployed and utilized in an effective, safe, healthy way for all of us.
Interesting. Very cool. I want to drill into that point of data provenance. Who determines what data is good and true? Seems to me that crypto can really help with the propositional truth. Propositional truth is what I got from John Vervaeke from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It
Yeah.
basically means factual truth, like what, China is right next to Korea. That's like something that is undisputable of factual truth. And this is different from other types of truth, which may be sort of subjective truth or the truth of existential truths and such like that. And crypto feels like it can really help in that particular realm. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like this propositional truth and how crypto can help with it?
Yeah. And obviously love Vervaeke's work, as I know you do as well, in this kind of whole kind of burgeoning, I don't know, space around new ways of knowing and wisdom. And we could definitely get into that as well more deeply. Yeah, I mean, I think both AI and crypto actually is actually relevant there, which is all these. So what crypto is a I don't, in many ways it's like a database, so to speak. It's just like a settlement layer of what happened. And when you think about what happened or what is true in that context, it's propositional knowing. It's concepts, it's language, it's explicit, tangible things that have happened that people verify as happened. Um, so I do think that is what that is useful for, which is useful. But I also think that that actually is quite limited
Mm-hmm.
uh, for things that actually matter to us or might matter in the future, which is more of like the subjective experience, the existential types of knowing, other types of knowing don't really get captured within a data set, so to speak. And then you think of AI too. It's AI can only really work with propositions
Yep.
and language
Yep.
explicitly, which is again important and powerful and useful, but again limiting into the full scope of what is possible or what matters or what we can perceive as humans.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the both crypto and AI are only within the realm of propositional truth, but and this is what I've been saying a lot about the existential truths and the existential problems. Our existential problems aren't going away. Throughout the history of technology, it seems like our existential problems never get solved by technology. Do you agree or do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I do agree.
Yeah.
I deeply agree. I think technology, um, again, to be overly generalizing, it solves surface level problems,
Yeah.
symptomatic problems, like the symptoms.
Yeah.
But it never really gets at the roots of anything. And I don't think anything really actually does. That's kind of like the mystery and the joy of life is this like infinite game. So I think technology always can play a part, does play a part, and it solves surface level things effectively. But that always leads to something else, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think
Yeah.
we should just be aware of that though, and don't think that tech can actually solve holistically everything. It's always just a tool for something else.
Were you I imagine that you're a tech optimist as I am as well. It sounds like I would categorize both of us, not to categorize it, yeah, as something that can be defined, but I would imagine both of us are not naive techno optimists. Were you a naive techno optimist at one point, and then you were pessimized, or were you always did you always see this thing that technology couldn't actually solve these existential
Yeah,
problems?
no. That's well said. Yeah, no, I would say I was more of a naive techno optimist to use that term. I mean, I think even higher level, like I have a more, I don't know, traditional upbringing,
Hmm.
studied finance,
Oh, interesting.
um, worked in finance, moved into tech, uh, focused more on like the analytical side. So kind of led analytics teams within startups, etc. And always had this uh, assumption bias that like the answer was in the data. Like
Yes.
analytics alone can solve the most important questions, analytics and tech, and then building tech solutions. Like there is this like end state that can be created by us using technology. That was sort of my just assumption. And I think a lot of that, yeah, I mean, maybe it's being more pessimistic or more realistic or more existential. I don't know, but yeah, that kind of that perspective kind of withered away over the
Mhm.
past handful of years. And now I'm probably more in a state where I think tech is amazing. And so I do like the tech optimism, like to some degree, but I do try to personally at least check that with, yeah, I mean, being more realistic. Like tech won't solve everything. And
Mhm.
actually, where I'm at now, and this gets more into more of the wisdom-esque stuff, I like actually that we can't solve everything, and there is this like infinite game like to be played. And so it's not necessarily pessimistic, it's more realistic and actually more like there's a positive orientation despite it being impossible to solve, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Because yeah, it reminds me of the parable when people talk about if you could live forever,
Yeah,
how bored you would get. And if everything was perfect, how, if heaven's just this place where everything is perfect all the
yeah,
time and there's no variation, there's no differentiation, there's no struggle, how boring that would be. And how
exactly.
that anybody who after 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years would then just essentially kill themselves because it would be it would be just so boring. And so yeah, it makes it's just like the nature of reality seems squishy in this sense, because it's like we're in this place, we've got this infinite struggle. When you're in the struggle, it often feels like this is just a horrible place that like, why am I here? But then after you get out of the struggle, you're like, oh man, that was a great thing I learned. I'm so glad I went through that struggle. What's your take on that?
Oh God, no, I completely agree. With that. I mean, so one of the things, and this is you mentioned Vervaeke, but another huge influence on me over the past few years or so, uh, Dr. Ian McGilchrist. I'm sure
Yep.
you've read
Yep.
him. Uh, I mean, and he wrote this amazing book 10 plus years ago, The Master and His Emissary, and then a more recent book, The Matter with Things. And I think one of the most fascinating chapters amongst many, many fascinating chapters was about uh and I'm simplifying it, but like just like the importance of paradox
Mm.
and how powerful paradox is to recognize, to hold multiple truths, to kind of try to like hold multiple things together at the same time. And I'm not doing it justice, but the reason it came up is you just said, I mean, some of the best pleasures we have are like after the worst times of our lives. And it's like a paradox.
Yeah.
And it's a paradox because we in our day-to-day lives, both individually and collectively, we try to solve problems. We're always like seeking equilibrium. We're always seeking like to be comfortable. But ironically, if we stay in comfort, then we're bored, we're miserable, we're depressed, we're anxious. So it's like you actually want struggle without really ever wanting struggle, but you want the struggle so that you can overcome the struggle. And it's just like this weird paradox that I think we don't have language, and maybe this goes back to language models
Yeah.
and such. Like we don't have language to really convey what I'm trying to even say, but we all kind of intuitively know it.
Yeah.
Um, and as and I'll finish with this, like, and as we build a society that is more and more linguistically scaffolded,
Mm.
whether it's literally through just like text-based communication or if it's with language models that determine everything, like we're just putting so much uh of what was once implicit or subjective or subtle, we're putting more and more into explicit language and trying to govern ourselves explicitly, but our language is inadequate at truly capturing the true depth of what we actually care about as individuals.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a ramble, but like I think there's so much to learn from being able to hold paradox, and somehow I would love us to accept that more regularly and think of new ways to devise language that can capture more and more of that subtle implicit.
That I really like that point of essentially, and this gets into the work of Wolfram, Stephen Wolfram, who I'm interviewing in 2 days. And it's so fascinating because we have these concepts that we've created through humanity over long periods of time that we share. Different cultures have different opinions on it and such. And we use the language to represent those concepts, and then we can share and we can discuss about them. But both the language and the concepts represent a whole bunch of different stuff. And I think Stephen
Yep.
Wolfram actually maybe might disagree with both of us, which is that the relative weight of the things that we can't put into language are actually very, very, very important. And a lot of the more technologist maybe. I mean, but I'm a technologist as well. I think you're a technologist too. So like, I think a lot of people who are in the technology world think that the vast majority of things can be put into language, and that if we just get the right language, if we just get the right computation, we'll be able to do it. And so relevant now with large language models, because they're going to be so useful. They're going to be so incredibly useful for so many different things. They already are. And then, but how useful, like where is the line? And that's, I think we can only discover it in the next 20 to 30 years, is like, where is the line between how useful these things become? And then where is that line end? And where do we still have to rely on sort of other ways of knowing? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, again, very well said. And I think my a lot of my, like, especially more recent, I guess, like reading, thinking, whatever, contemplating, is on some of these topics, which is, yeah, like, can language capture everything? Just like a simple question like that. And my simple answer is no. There's so much that will never be captured in any kind of linguistic structure. Like, by design of what linguistic structures even are, it's impossible to me. Similarly with computation, like, I don't think, I think there's so much more that can't be, that's non-computational in nature. And that's not to say computation is not important. It obviously is. It's super important. And it's powerful and useful and all that. But there's just more. That's non-computational, non-linguistic. And yeah, and so yeah, I mean, again, it's going back to the point of yes, we should continue to develop and build all of these language models, these AI algorithms, these computationally elegant things, and try to keep exploring more and more and explaining more and more forever. Like, we should always do that. And also simultaneously, I think we should realize that it can't be everything. And so, I mean, one point that comes to mind, and again, like, maybe this goes back to like the AI and crypto, like where they can come together. AI is powerful, but like, how do we govern AI? How do we decide what actually to use AI for and not use it for, or like what's good and bad and what's ethical and not ethical? Like, these are more non-computational questions, I think, right? Like, what's beautiful, what's meaningful, what's sacred? I mean, these are like kind of weirdly religious concepts, I think, are non-computational. And I think we need to devise better, I mean, to be overly simplistic, like governance structures that are non-computational to be in charge of our powerful linguistic technologies. And that's like the crypto angle again. It's like crypto can actually cohere people in ways that is non-explicit, but allows them to be exploratory in their perceptions to then govern and then use power. Yeah.
How does crypto do that? What's the connection there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I think one thing with crypto, and maybe I didn't say this really before, I think what crypto does actually is it allows, well, it puts into code
Mm,
incentives, basically.
yeah, interesting.
And then incentivization allows humans to be humans and do what they do. So like, you can kind of,
Yes.
it allows for people to be more them in some way. And maybe we can unpack that, because that may not have made much sense, but
No, it made sense. Yep.
yeah, so it allows people to just, yeah, I mean, to explore, to think, to do what they can do, and then come back into consensus after they do whatever they do. And I think that's just like going to be powerful. That like simple mechanism of humans can do what they do, and then they come back into consensus. Whatever they can explicitly say, they will, and then they can go further afterwards to explore subjectively what they want to do.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. This goes back to a point that I learned from Wolfram, which is that, and I agree with this point, and I think he gets something that a lot of technologists don't get, is that that what we want, what we desire, what is beautiful, what is sacred, though, as you mentioned, are all subjective things. And so the AI could do that. You could ask
Mhm.
it to say what you want, but it will just come up with the representation of the middling desires. Like, and this is also a problem that humans had before large language models too, is like, because the mimetic theory of Girard is that we want what others have. And we want what others have who we respect, and we don't want what others have who we don't respect,
Yeah.
or love, or all those different things. And so, but that also is not a great way to figure out what we as individuals want. It's just like, so we're trapped in the, and and it's so funny, like going through the Buddhism and going through the secularized Buddhism version that the West has kind of really fallen into in the last 30 years, is like this nature of desire, as if desire was this bad thing, which seems like a secret Puritan mimetic trap that entered Buddhism. But that might be a human thing too, as well, in terms of just like, it's a universal that we have this
Yeah.
puritanical nature. What do you think about all that? There's a lot of things to put in there, but
Yeah,
what do
no. Yeah, I love all of that.
you,
And I haven't actually thought about necessarily Gerard and sort of like the mimetic stuff as
mm,
it relates to language models specifically before, but that's a fascinating thing to bring
mm,
in. And it is the same thing actually, right? Because like throughout history, without technology being what it is today, yeah, how did people know what they wanted? They didn't necessarily think about from their own like inner being. They looked around them at their families, friends, people they respected, and just replicated what they saw. And so language models are that, just with a million times more power.
in computation.
So yeah, exactly. But I think that's just a fascinating idea because it's the same dynamic playing out. What came to mind also, um, just now thinking about like memetics, yeah, because I mean so much is built off of what we see from others, right? And so we're all constantly in this game of looking around, mimicking others, and all of that. But like novelty does come in somehow. Like
Mm,
new ideas do somehow come in. Um, and I'm fascinated by that sort of question. Like, where does novelty actually come from? Which then gets into like complexity science and like emergence and like
mm,
what is true emergence? Where does that come from? Because you can't program it, you can't compute it, you can't mimetically find it, but
mm,
yet it still does come in. And then where that then made me think of is, and I'm sure you've maybe heard of this guy or read his books, but he wrote a book recently, I Am a Strange Loop. And before that, he wrote like Gödel, Escher, Bach. I think maybe it's a different order of them. Hofstadter, I think is his name.
yeah.
Douglas Hofstadter. But he's obsessed with sort of like emergence, or like how do we get to these like where does novelty come from if we're all just like looping around? Um and I don't know if he really had an answer. I mean, no one probably has an answer. You probably can't really explain an answer, but like it does happen. And I think it's just interesting to think about that conceptually. Yeah.
So I have a tangential question that we won't go into now, but maybe we'll come back to it. Is what do you think will happen with books with AI? Because I was as you were saying that, I was like, okay, yeah, I've got I Am a Strange Loop. Somebody told me it was a really good book. I started reading it. I didn't understand it. I put it
Yeah.
down, never picked it back up again, and I just went to go on Amazon and go get another sample so I could try again. But then I'm thinking about how my learning process is shifting for AI, with AI, and how it's more about this interactive thing now, because now it's not so much as about a book that I read, and also my attention span is shot now, like I think it is with many other people.
Yeah.
But that just might be a symptom of a changing paradigm. Um,
Yeah.
because now, instead of reading a book by a single author, I'm now finding myself, if I'm looking for information, I'm now essentially establishing a relationship with a concept or with a technical thing that I revisit over and over again. And so we could talk about the changing nature of the book, maybe within
Yeah.
your own personal life as well. But there's something else. Well, the emergence and the complexity science is really interesting. Oh yes, I remember what I wanted to talk about, the new ideas. So AI has can't it doesn't seem like it can create new ideas. And what I learned from Wolfram a week ago is that it doesn't seem like we can even understand the new AI ideas if AI were to create new ideas and we don't have a narrative to understand those ideas, then we can't understand them. And so we need to have the narrative that allows us to understand them first. And I think the progress of science shows that most people will reject the narrative that's true as they get older. So the new narrative, the novel narrative.
Yes.
And I'm curious what you think about this, and if you've been in contemplation for this particular subject of like newness. Can the AI? Do you think the AI will soon be able to create new things?
Yeah, a lot there, which I love.
Yeah.
So I think one thing I've been thinking about a bit, I mean, that whole kind of like meta question. So we like as people or as individuals, as collectives, we explore like the unknown, we explore chaos. We then put chaos into like bits of order. Like we try to
Mm.
make sense of chaos. That becomes like language, concepts, symbols, etc. What that then does is it then limits our perception, and kind of like puts blinders on ourselves. So then we don't even see other new forms of chaos. And that's kind of like the history of ourselves, right? And so when new ideas come, we can't like we immediately reject it because it doesn't fit within our models. The models are powerful and they let us build new things, do new things, all of that, solve problems, but it does keep us blinded from like novelty. And so the question I think you just said is sort of like, how do we think about novel? Like, what is novelty?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and to your question about like language models specifically, a thought that just came to mind was like we have a term called novelty, but I think there's like different types of novelty. There's like novelty that exists within our current structures but haven't been said yet.
Yes.
And then there's novelty that's like beyond our structures. And I think we need to differentiate those types of novelty to even have a conversation. Because I think language models is unbelievably powerful and generative at finding novelty within structure,
Yes.
if that makes sense. Like it's good to it's able to synthesize ideas to find like things within the latent space that no one has ever said yet or built yet or created yet. It can do that, and that's powerful and amazing. And we see that with like text to image or text to video or just like text conversations. You can like find new ideas that exist within a paradigm. But I don't think language models have the ability to create novel paradigms. That to me is like a uniquely human
Mm-hmm.
endeavor, or like and this gets more to like the weird kind of woo-woo spiritual type stuff that
Go there. Let's go there.
yeah, which I think deeply exists. Language can maybe describe it better, but yeah.
Well, let's go into the woo-woo stuff, because that feels like it's going to become really important. But then there's also a trap in the woo-woo stuff too, because all of the fantastical things, like I love this brings into Steve Jobs has one of the best stories that I hear rarely about Steve Jobs is that he, imagine at his funeral, imagine all the people that went to his funeral, hardcore technologists, not many of the bohemians, although there is a lot bohemian slash hippies who in Silicon Valley. And he hands a book to everybody, or part of his will was to give a book, which is the autobiography of a yogi by I forget the name of the yogi, but one of the yogis who came from India to California and merged with this anywhere from 1880 to 1960s of consciousness recreation of the consciousness literature and vibe. And in this book is just like this fantastical journey of this 900-year-old yogi living in the Himalayas doing all sorts of miracles, and then like all this crazy stuff that a lot of the technologists would have been just like what is Steve going on about again. And like that part seems really important, and it all has to do with miracles, like. And there's seems like there's a few different types of miracles. One are the miracles that are like defy the laws of physics. And then there are the miracles of just like, oh, I never thought that would be possible. Usually in relation to our psychic trauma and psychic, stuff that we hold on to, and like letting that go and being like, oh, damn. And I think that's the more important one. And I think that's the more relevant miracle. But the question of whether those miracles define laws of physics because we don't understand all the physical laws yet, that seems like a really important one, because that also seems like it's a paradigm breaking one, because the science says no, that's not possible. We've got our laws of physics, we've got our Newtonian laws of physics, like those work. Those, you know, look at all this crazy stuff that we've done. And then if I've been reading the history of semiconductor, and semiconductor actually relies upon quantum mechanics, which I don't believe that we fully understand the implications of quantum mechanics, and that could be actually the way that miracles happen. What's your take on that?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Well said. And yeah, I mean, there's so much there. Where I mean, on the last point with quantum mechanics versus like classical like physics and such, I think it's such a fascinating thing to really think about what these distinctions are, or like what the quantum actually even is saying or means. Um, and I think we haven't remotely grasped it. I haven't. I mean, and no one really has, at least not in like mainstream culture,
Yeah,
what these things are actually even saying. Um, in terms of like classical Newtonian mechanical like science, yeah, obviously it's all true and works and nothing. And I think this is also where language breaks down, where you talk about these more like miracles or like I don't know,
yes,
psychic phenomena or UFOs or all these like things that don't make any sense within our like Newtonian classical worldview. I think when people talk about it, these like phenomena, um, people take it to mean it's an attack against classical physics, which I don't think it is. I think it's just an expanded view of things where like classical physics works,
yeah,
obviously. Newtonian mechanics works, obviously. But these anomalies still exist. That doesn't mean that the mechanics or mechanical physics doesn't work. It means that there's potentially a newer, more broader, more holistic way of thinking about things. It's like taking a step back and like zooming out. And I think that might sound like woo woo, but then you think about quantum physics, which makes no sense in a classical
yeah,
perspective. Like it's full of paradox and like I don't know, like synchronicities exist in quantum physics, or like time doesn't exist, and all these crazy things. Um, but yet that is actually what drives classical physics. Like it actually is the precursor to classical physics in some ways. Um, and maybe some metaphors I think about loosely. It's like the conscious mind versus the unconscious mind. Like we only think in conscious terms. We're conscious beings. We have our language. We have our thoughts, whatever. But with like Jung and Freud and psychoanalysis, like we actually now kind of know that the unconscious is causally influencing the conscious without us having any idea how to even begin to talk about the unconscious. I mean, besides like dream analysis or whatnot.
yeah,
But the unconscious is like a more deeper level than the conscious. We can't understand it, but it has causal power.
yeah,
To me, it's kind of like the quantum level is more fundamental. We don't really understand it fully. We know it works and it has causal influence, but we can't really understand it. And so maybe things like, I don't know, like psychic phenomena or anomalies in general are somehow consistent within a quantum framework. We just don't have the language yet in a classical sense to really even talk about it. So it's not refuting anything, it's just expanding things.
brilliant. That's really interesting. Um, hmm. Okay, yeah. So I feel like I don't have any follow-up questions. That was really interesting. Um, let's go into the book thing. How in the book, as it changes from AI, how has your personal
Hmm. Oh yeah.
how has your personal learning experience
Yeah,
changed?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has changed yet. And that's not to say it's not going to. It's just that I haven't fully explored it yet, and I'm actually excited to. What I think might happen, and I should just play around with this for my own sake, is just, yeah, I mean, like reading a book, which I mean, I actually just really enjoy, but like, that's very much like a one-sided kind of relationship. It's like an author at one point in time wrote something, and then you're just like consuming it, processing it, and all that. I think what we'll see is more bi-directional conversational learning with authors, and they don't obviously have to be there talking to you. It's you have an AI model of them talking to you. And this could be living authors, it could be dead authors, it could be you can be talking to like Jesus about the Bible, like in these like crazy kind of ways. Um, that's obviously generative. It's not the real thing, but you can probably find really interesting like nuggets within the text that you wouldn't have if you just read it in a linear fashion. And I think also you can learn more deeply because you can ask questions that pertain to your unique interest or your unique whatever. So you can like probe on things, you can dismiss things, you can follow up on things. You can ask where the references were, and you can like look at that person's books. Like it's a very much like choose your own adventure way of learning, um, which I think is going to be for those that are curious and ambitious and proactive, like insanely powerful for
Yeah,
them.
yeah. Ooh, that gets into juicy territory because now it feels like the so we've got the transhumanists, and the transhumanists think that we're entering a stage where we're going to merge with the technology, and a new species will be created out of that. And we've got a less well-known theory that I get from David Hawkins, Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote Power versus Force, which is the great introductory book if anybody's curious about going into his philosophy. What he proposes is that we're entering a new that there will be a new species, but that will be Homo spiritus, i.e., the human who has connected with the spirit within and divinity and such. And then I'm sure there are a bunch of other theories about all the new species of humans that are going to be created. Uh, and so what does not seem deniable is that we're entering a sort of fracture period where the human species may actually fracture and create new species of humans that will change based on cultural variation, but also maybe genetic variation once humans start to get better at changing our genes, and also how to what degree they merge with technology. And then I guess the fourth is to what degree they merge with spirituality. Any thoughts on this particular thing? Have you thought about this, or any other questions we should ask about this?
No, I mean, I've not thought about that as much explicitly, but I love that direction of thought. I have not read that book. I think I've heard of his name, but I don't actually know much about him. So that's actually a good thing for me to kind of dig into because I have heard, I think, his name before. And that sounds really interesting too. I mean, I think that seems also likely or possible, like this like divergence. I mean, you kind of see it even happening now and maybe that's the point. You see it like there are different I don't know, mimetic tribes of people that are like really rapidly kind of evolving. It's going faster and faster.
Interesting.
I mean, you see it even. I mean, it's not like it's different human beings, but you see it in just tribal dynamics, like politically speaking or socially speaking, where you have different tribes of people that cannot communicate with each other, or like the
Yeah,
ability to
interesting.
talk is decreasing. um where you have different like like worldviews, right? Like just to be simplistic in the US, left versus right, like they actually don't see the world the same way anymore. And it's like it's fracturing more and more.
Yeah,
And as
interesting.
tech just accelerates all of it, you'll see just increasingly like one side uses whatever Twitter, one side uses something else, and like you have different platforms built for these different tribes that are just completely separated. Um, and then you have like more of like I don't know religions kind of having a revival. So then you have like the devout Catholics making a resurgence. You have new types of religions with like AI gods on one camp. Like you have all these things you can kind of see just playing out.
Yeah, it's gonna get really weird. So I really like the point of that it brings back to that scientific narrative, because there's not only the scientific narrative and the fact that if we don't have a scientific narrative for it, we can't understand it. But there's also cultural narratives, and there's also tribal
Yeah.
narratives, and those are the reason. There's another thinker. There's two thinkers who both use the word patchwork age to describe where we're headed. One, his name is Paul Publisher on Twitter, and another one, Curtis Yarvin, who created the Urbit network. Both of them use the word patchwork in very different contexts, very different philosophical realms, but basically describing that we're entering a stage of history where there's going to be little mimetic tribes that go so far off from the other paradigms. This is what I'm getting now from our conversation is they're going to be so far between each other's paradigms that there will be no understanding between those two paradigms, which feels like great for evolution and
Yeah.
competition and such, because now we're going to, instead of just this monoculture that we've had for the past 40 years, which is just getting very, very stale, which was very interesting for the past 40 years, but is now getting very stale. Is crumbling. It's going to be replaced by a sort of infinite competition and a Cambrian explosion of experimentation, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there is, I think that's happening. I mean, I think like people can debate if it's good or bad, but I think just the reality is like it is going to happen. It is happening. It's going to increase in speed. I think we're going to see that Cambrian explosion of different types of collectives doing different things, which is again good and bad. It's more chaotic, it's
Yeah.
messier,
Yeah.
it's all of that. And yeah, I think so. One thing I'm thinking about on like the crypto side, again, it's like how do you create consensus amongst different collectives that can't really speak the same language, but you can maybe at least to some degree agree on some things. Like you can have bare minimum things that everyone agrees on that kind of builds up over time in a healthier way that these different tribes can all kind of like leverage this like shared thing. Like say it's Bitcoin and Bitcoin becomes this like settlement layer of like the basic truths of things that everyone's using, but then they have their own currencies and cultures and things that they can kind of independently use. But then they all come together with like a shared consensus reality of some degree, um, which might be helpful. Yeah.
So a question came to mind about Bitcoin there. It's because I thought, okay, this question, we have the Bitcoin, we have the first time that truth, value, and database that can't be tampered with all put together in the same thing. And I thought, okay, well, truth and value, that's the first time we've had truth and value mixed in one thing. But I guess truth and value have been mixed as soon as we created currencies or gold. Because it's like gold helps us understand what's true in terms of how humans value something. And value is sort of like an abstract thing, like a psychotechnology that is very like, seems very concrete, but it's actually very, very abstract. And so money allowed us to formalize that, and then Bitcoin allows us to formalize that in a database that's permissionless. Is that accurate? Would you agree? Do you disagree?
Yeah, I think no strong disagreements. I think the permissionless thing that you just said maybe is actually maybe a bit more revolutionary, I guess, in what that actually allows.
Yeah.
That maybe is not fully we didn't really talk about that part as much. Because I think yeah, like gold or the US dollar could be that shared value that's global in scope and decentralized and all of that, because anyone can kind of use gold and dollars and it holds value and all of that. The challenge, though, is like the dollar, I mean, for example, is predicated on the entire US government, like backing it,
Yeah.
which has all sorts of its own cultural ideologies built into it, good or bad. It just does.
Yeah.
Whereas Bitcoin is a bit more, it just doesn't have that much as much baggage. There's baggage to it because you have these different miners in different countries doing different things, but it has to some degree less of an ideological or less ideological baggage associated with it, which could allow for more cultural experimentation at the fringes, which could potentially lead to more just experiments and evolution. So yeah, so it's not like it's a new concept. It's just like potentially a better version
Yes.
of having a shared value layer. And then you have like the Ethereum and the Near and the other layer ones that allow you to actually build in more computation and data
Yeah.
into that layer in a way where you can with Bitcoin, but it's not as easy to develop on and such. So now we can put more data, more information, more explicit things into this shared database of value that can be utilized by anyone to then do what they want on top of it.
Okay, that's an interesting point. This goes back to Near. What do you think Near did that Ethereum doesn't do? What's the critical factor in Near that makes it useful?
Yeah, I mean, so Near and the team behind it, basically, actually, I mean, to put it simply, Ethereum has a roadmap.
Hmm.
And Near did a lot of those things before they did. So like sharding, scaling, the way it's structured. And I don't have I'm not as technical, so I don't know
Yeah.
exactly how to describe it elegantly, but it's more scalable, more secure. Well, the security, I guess, is not necessarily as true, but it scales, it's cheaper, it's more effective, all of those things. So it's just in many ways a yeah, a better version,
Yeah.
but we also are trying to, or the community is trying more to work with Ethereum and not be as competitive. It's
Yeah.
more of like, how do we help each other like
Fill in the
solve
gaps.
problems? So Ethereum is way bigger, better settlement layer potentially, but we can do better scalability. And so we can kind of work together.
Interesting. Okay. And so in the last 5 minutes, I would love to actually go into the wisdom school, just kind of a brief dip into it. What are you thinking? Well, what are you thinking is the gap for wisdom school? Because you have John Vervaeke, who both of us kind of have learned a lot from, and that was really interesting because he does this 50 episode, 50 hours. I would I'm now listening to it for the fourth time, and the it was such a large question for me of whether there was actually a live audience there, because he makes it feel like there's a live audience there
Yes.
inside the room, and he's got the whiteboard, and it feels like you're sitting in a class. And then I asked ChatGPT, I don't know if it's true or not, and no, there's no live audience there. But it felt like I was part of a wisdom school, or it feels like I'm part of a wisdom school, right? And but he just kind of just creates a whole bunch of content and takes his just like gargantuan and encyclopedic knowledge of the whole history of cognitive science and just kind of like shares it. What are you thinking for your wisdom school? What are like the initial thoughts of this thing that you're thinking?
Yeah, for sure. And also obviously love that entire series. I think that might have been like the series that kind of like changed my mind the most in the past 5 years, like kind of
Yeah.
like woke me up to a lot of new ways of even perceiving. So yeah, massively impressive piece of work there, and he himself is amazing. Um, well, right, so I don't think I'm actually building like a wisdom school. I think I love the idea of a wisdom school. I don't think I'm going to build that.
Hmm.
But what I'm thinking about though, I mean, I think Vervaeke's work and a lot of these people's work uh, is amazing for those that are already kind of like in the scene, so to speak. Um, it's really hard to actually break into that. Like most people are not going to spend 50 plus hours watching that particular series and putting in the work to understand the terms
Yeah.
that he uses and to really understand the lingo and the history and the meaning. Like it's very there's walls there to get in. Um, and I think somehow a type of wisdom school or wisdom education needs to be more accessible,
Hmm.
digestible,
Hmm.
more practical, more something. Um, so I think just like we need to be thinking about education differently, like as like a culture, and individually, less about, and I think like economically, this is just going to happen because AI is going to like take a lot of the jobs that we have done
Yes.
historically around like software development or analysis or these like more
Left brain.
computationally oriented jobs are going to kind of go away, and then humans are going to be left with what we can do better, which is like creativity, using our intuition, thinking more outside the box, like discerning, describing quality. Like I think we just naturally will probably go this way anyway. But that's what I'm talking about. It's like we need to be thinking about how do we get more of like a, I don't know, well-rounded, holistic, more like humanities-esque education around discerning quality as opposed to just doing
Yeah.
computational like work all the time. So that's one thing. It's just like, how do we train in that? How do we practice that? How do we explore that? How do we want to do that? How do we develop curiosity within people? Um, so I think that's a major thing, that whole educational component. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm playing around with that.
Hmm.
And then the next layer to me is that's all great on the individual level, to develop people to be more wise, more curious, better at discerning, whatever. But then how do we cohere people like that together to then like do more collectively than you can do individually? So that's like tools of
Mm.
like collective intelligence or collective wisdom, things like new ways of coming to consensus in a way that isn't so reductionist that
Yeah.
we typically see today, or overly hierarchical like we see today. So new ways of like governance, new ways of coherence, and that's a lot of like the crypto stuff that I'm fascinated by. Just new ways of coming together to then do more together that you could do individually. Um, and I think that's sort of like some of the areas I'm exploring. I mean, it's new forms of education, new ways of knowing, and then it's new ways of cohering collectively. And then maybe the third part would be more in like, and I'm fascinated by just like financial technology in particular, which again is the crypto side. But it's like, how do we then, once we have wise people, once they're connected collectively, how do they then take action like in real
Mm.
life to solve things? And I think money or something like money is an amazingly powerful force to just like deploy capital, like deploy energy, deploy
Yeah.
something.
Money.
And so how do we rethink about like the deployment of capital, so to speak, in a more effective way where these wise collectives sit on top and then they can deploy capital to make change that they actually like desired to happen, and it's just like a healthier system. Um, so it's all very vague, but those are
Yeah.
some of the things I'm just like exploring a lot now, which I think is super important and is fascinating personally.
Definitely doesn't sound too vague. That was pretty concrete for me. Um,
Cool.
uh, Thank you so much for coming on the show. And how can people find out more about you and what you're working on?
Yeah, thank you, man. This was fun. I mean, on Twitter, DW_Stein is my handle. I have a new Substack that I'm beginning to try to write some of these ideas out at davidweinstein.substack.com, I think. But yeah, Twitter probably is the easiest.
Great. I'll put that in the show notes. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, man.